afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris Howe. I'm the Mekong Delta Landscape Lead for WWF Vietnam.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ritesh, and I'm the Senior Advisor for Convergence, which is a global network for blended finance. And that's what we're going to discuss today from my side. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Ellen. So sorry for being late. I got caught up speaking to a lot of interesting female entrepreneurs outside. So I manage a fund called Mekong Earth Regeneration Fund. What we focus on is investing in regenerative agriculture in the lower Mekong region. So that's Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam.
This is fantastic. So now I can also breathe because now I have all my speakers on stage with me, and I will not make you stand up and sit down, maybe later on again. But I would like to say that today's session is also focused on what it is, how to work in it, and then we've got our lovely two speakers providing the investor lens on nature-based solutions. But first of all, I'd like to start with Chris. Chris, you're going to talk through so that for the next part, everyone will be able to stand up afterwards to say when I ask a question on what nature-based solutions, and they'll know right after. So please go ahead and explain the what and how.
Yeah. Okay, there it is. So thanks, everyone. I'll go through this slide a little bit slowly. Everyone can read it, and then you definitely will be able to answer the question better afterwards. I'm going to keep this really short because we're mainly here to have a conversation. But what I'm going to do is just focus on this slide, and then I'm going to show you one example. But I do want you to understand that it's an example. It is not the be-all and end-all of nature-based solutions. It's just one example that we happen to be working on. And so there's been a huge process over the last decade globally, run by IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. You can see their logo on the top right-hand corner, to come up with a global standard for nature-based solutions. You will see other versions from other agencies, but typically IUCN, which is a union, it has governmental, state, non-governmental, and indigenous peoples' organizations as members, has worked really hard to come up with a pretty solid definition. And now they're running certification and training and all kinds of things. But you can see there that a nature-based solution is an action to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystems in a way that addresses societal challenges. Climate change is one that's front of mind for a lot of people, but it's also food, water security, natural disasters, and other things. It's effectively and adaptively. The key thing is it simultaneously provides human well-being and biodiversity benefits. And so a nature-based solution is not deepening and widening a canal. A nature-based solution is not investing in electric vehicles. A nature-based solution is not replacing your light bulbs with energy-efficient light bulbs. Those things may be very helpful and useful or not. They're not nature-based solutions. So I'm just going to give you a very quick example of one nature-based solution that we work on. It is not a carbon climate change mitigation nature-based solution, which is the most common one you might think of. You think of people planting trees to absorb carbon. This is not that. This is about climate adaptation. This is the Lower Mekong River. It brings down water and sediment from the catchment, deposits it, and hence the Mekong Delta was formed. This is really important. If you don't have water and sediment flooding out over the delta, then you don't have a delta. And so in the last 50 or 60 years, there's been a move away from natural seasonal flooding in the delta, cutting off the river from the floodplain, cutting it off from the delta, preventing that water and sediment from spreading out and settling. That water and sediment provides soil height, soil fertility, water storage, and other benefits, as well as being good for nature and wildlife. And without it, farmers have to resort to pesticides, fertilizers, herbicides, and the soil shrinks and is more vulnerable to climate change. So what we're doing in the Delta with other partners, and see some of them in the room here, is restoring natural flooding to areas of the Delta where it's technically, financially, and socially feasible. That means sedimentation is restored, It delivers improved soil height and fertility and increased water storage. So if you think back to the definition, what we're doing is working with a natural ecosystem. We're restoring a natural ecosystem process, is delivering benefits to people and nature. Therefore, it's a nature-based solution. When it comes to investment, which I guess is what this conference is about, there have been multiple reports, of which this is one, which says that a lack of information on the returns and impact of investing in nature-based solutions is the biggest barrier. If people knew what the benefits were going to be, tangible or non-tangible, they might invest. So what we've done, and many of the other partners in the room are also doing the same thing, either with us or separately, is have a look at what those benefits might be. This is a field of what they call floating rice in the Delta. So 50 or 60 years ago, there were huge areas of this in the Delta. Natural seasonal flooding, the rice grows up with the floods. When the flood stops rising, the rice stops growing, ripens, and when the floodwaters recede, you harvest it. So it's the opposite of intensive rice farming. It doesn't require any inputs. That's why you can paddle around once a day and have lots of free time. But what else is going on there? Remember I said seasonal flooding, sedimentation and water storage? So we've measured that because we know that the barriers to investment is a lack of information on what the benefits are. So we've measured the benefits. We haven't worked out how much sedimentation and water storage capacity is worth. That's another step. If nearly 20 times as much water being stored in these fields, not going downstream and flooding downstream, that's a huge benefit. But is there a payment that could be made for that? And we've also looked at the technical and social feasibility, technical, financial and social feasibility of scaling up that kind of flood-based agriculture. So we worked with a company called Royal Haskening DHV, probably well known to many people here, to take a wide range of data. And we can see that there's about 300,000 or 400,000 hectares in the Vietnamese Mekong Delta that might be suitable for that. So when we're thinking about investment, we've got an idea of what the returns might be. We've got an idea of where it's feasible. Now let's take the next step. We've also, of course, this is rice, so you need to have someone to buy it. And we've partnered with a company, two companies actually, who take that floating rice, which is, you won't see it in the shops, but they've made it into a product, in this case, floating rice noodles, which is currently, just about to be on sale in the European market. And if you'd gone to the Taste of Australia event at the weekend, you might have seen it for sale there. So you see all these bits of the jigsaw are coming together. So that's a very brief introduction. You've got the definition, you've got one example. So I'll stop there for now.
I think that's a great introduction. I also want to add, looking at nature-based solutions and the wording itself, what comes out of it in a very simple way is working with nature and not against nature. So with that, I would like to ask the audience the next question. Following this introduction, do you know what nature-based solutions are? If so, please stand up. Oh, I hope all of you are standing. Okay, thanks for that activity. So I think that's a good round of applause for Chris and his introduction. And to you guys as well for listening. And now we're going to shift a little bit to look at the investor lens around nature-based solutions. And we have two speakers. Both have a commonality in their approach, but also different approach as well. So I would love to turn to you, Ritesh, to talk about Convergence, how you as an investor are working on it, and how you are working on nature-based solutions with any examples from the region or the Mekong Delta. So a short introduction on what you do, and then we'll move over to Ellen.
Absolutely. But before I go there, I just want to ask a question. How many people have heard about blended finance? You just need to raise your hands. Don't stand up, please. It's fine. Okay. And how many people have actually been in a blended finance transaction? All right. I see a few hands there, which is great. So the majority of y'all have heard about it. That's great. So let's start from the very basic. But before I go there, I want to give a very quick intro on what we do. And just to clarify, we are not an investor. We are basically a not-for-profit. We are a global network for blended finance. And what we mean by that is we do 4 things. We guide the market with data, knowledge, and thought leadership on blended finance. We build capacity of various stakeholders, public, private, and philanthropic actors on the topic of blended finance. We give grants to design blended finance structures so that we can mobilize more transactions towards blended finance in emerging markets, especially where there are market failures, so that we make private money flow in areas where currently it's not flowing, which is around achieving sustainable development goals. And the last part is, at the end of the day, we are a network. So the whole idea of this network is to see how do we bring these diverse stakeholders together on topics, on discussions, so that we see more blending happen. Now, coming back to the question on what is blended finance, and to put it in very simple terms without using any jargons, how do we use the development funds, right? The development funds, which normally come with a very strong impact lens. And these development funds are normally given by overseas development assistance funds, like, say, DFAT as an example. Then you have MDBs and DFIs like ADB, IFC, etc. And then, of course, the philanthropic actors as well in many countries on how they give some concessional money with the main objective of really, making sure that there is impact. So how do we use that development funds in a very strategic way so that we can alter the risk return profile of projects, investments, and make them more bankable or investable, and bring private sector in to join hands? What we want is essentially the mainstream private sector capital to join hands towards SDG financing, and they will only do it if their fiduciary responsibility and if their shareholder expectations are met. Otherwise, you're not going to see that happen. So that's essentially, more specifically, what we do. We try to see how we can mobilize more blended finance globally.
Ritesh, before I move on to Ellen, I think it's important to go back one step. Why is the need of blended finance? How did it look before blended finance, and why is this so much more innovative? I think that also clears up what was it before and why this.
So once again, this comes back to the core question, right? That the overall SDG financing gap is in trillions. We all know that. You pick up any report, it stands anything between 3 trillion to 9 trillion, whichever estimates you want to believe. That's your call, right? And the total development funding available, which is basically just seeking impact globally, is around $250 billion. That's it. Okay? That's put together all the government money available for impact, for all the ODA funding available for impact, and all the philanthropic capital available for impact. Now, if you want to really see this transition, and if you really want to achieve these sustainable development goals, there is no other way but to bring private sector in. And what we've seen more specifically through blending of capital, and based on the data that we collect, we've seen $1 of concessional funding or development funding is able to mobilize $4 of commercial capital into areas where it's not flowing. And that's where we can use these billions to turn them into trillions through blending of capital, so that we can try to get closer to sustainable development goals. So that's the...
Thank you so much, Ritesh. So blending of capital is actually using various different funds. And investors, a couple of years ago, was not one of the partners you would obviously think about. It's become one of these odd bedfellows to partner to actually a very normal, soon-to-be process to have in these sort of discussions. So I'd love to turn to Ellen and to have you take the microphone and talk a little bit about your work as well around nature-based solutions and your climate fund.
So even within our investors and, the WWF Convergence and us, and within our network, there's misunderstanding or not the same alignment when it comes to nature-based solutions. When I go and talk to an investor, because I'm in the middle, I'm both raising money and looking for companies to invest in. When we talk about nature-based solutions to investors, they're like, oh, you're going to conserve some forest somewhere. Where's the commercial element to this? And then when I go and talk about nature-based solution to our potential companies, it's, oh, all you want me to do is impact. What about our smallholder farmers? So for us, exactly what Christina said, nature is a very powerful force. We don't want to work against it. It costs a lot of money, resources, time, and asset to do so. On the reverse, if we have nature and we leverage nature, what we want to do is leverage nature so that we can be more productive on our agricultural land and have less input. And I think Chris gave a very real example of that, which is the lower Mekong Delta, where because people need a livelihood, and down there they grow a lot of rice. So they work against nature by cutting off the water so that they can plant rice all year round. What Chris' work have done to demonstrate is how do we work with nature instead. So when it's dry season and the water is not there, then we plant the rice. But when it's flooded, we allow the flooding to happen. When the flooding happens, we can put fish and shrimps and crabs in there. And that means that the smallholder farmers still get an income. So that's exactly the kind of business model that we want to support. So in the Mekong Earth Regeneration Fund, we look for business models that support the smallholder farmers with just transitioning the way that they grow food, the way that we use our land. But on the blended finance piece, I also work on our commercial fund, and really for that, what we care about is the commercial return. But for this fund, we have two targets. One is the regeneration of land, and second is how do we improve the life of the smallholder farmers. In this sort of investment, we need support. We cannot do it by ourselves, and I've been very lucky to have a lot of partnership. We sit here with the three of us, seems like we're not connected, but we're all working on the same thing, like literally, not just figuratively. We have the same projects that we share and blended finance isn't just about this one moment that we're putting different kind of capitals together. It's over a period of time. So for a company to transition from the traditional extractive way of farming to a regenerative way of farming, it's going to take a lot of time. One of our business model, just to move from production of cinnamon to organic cinnamon, it takes 3 to 5 years to prove that this works, to prove that there's a market, to get the smallholder farmers on board. And then they take another 3 years just to get certification. So at each and every stage, they need different kind of capital, And this is where really blended finance really support. And then when they graduate, when they already have the certification, when they already have a value chain that works, we would then invest the capital so that they can continue and scale up that business. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think what you said as well, all three of you are coming from different angles, and it might not be so obvious why. But this is where the accelerating part is, because you all need each other to accelerate that impact. Can I ask, it might seem a very simple question, but the simple question is, why talk so much about nature-based solutions? What's the urgency right now? And if I could start with Chris and go through in your one key component, what's the urgency from each side of you that you see that brings back to your specific business? Why so much now?
Well, I think the environment's under increasing pressure, and if you like, non-nature-based solutions are even more expensive and more difficult, and are not really helping, to meet the challenge in the way that nature-based solutions can. Now, of course, nature-based solutions can't solve all of societal's challenges, but they can make a contribution, and typically restoring natural processes gives you something which, while it's not free in the general sense, it's a process that has maybe, in the case of the Mekong Delta, led to the rich resource that we had to start with. And so it's not super complicated to think about the sediment and the water and the seasonal flooding creating this resource to start with. So why not use that to maintain the resource as opposed to cut it off? Globally, of course, we're facing the challenge of climate change, and so a key nature-based solution is the storage of carbon primarily, but the mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions, which needs to go hand in hand with the reduction of emissions. But because of the planetary crises of climate change and biodiversity loss, this is a really strong driver for the deployment of nature to help us create a better future for people on the planet.
Chris, you really do present it very well. In terms of Ellen, yourself, why then look at this? It's a shift from what Mekong Capital has done originally. Why this shift?
Why do we focus on soil and agriculture? So when I started this journey, 2 years ago, and I share about agricultural, projects or pipelines or companies to invest in, agriculture without an element of obvious tech is not very exciting and interesting to investors, which is quite, I find it very perplexing, because everything we consume, everything we have is literally either from the ground, we're grown on the ground, or we mine it from the ground, right? So what I'm wearing now is grown on the ground, and the metal in my shoes is literally taken from the ground. We are an agricultural country, Vietnam and the other regions that I cover, which is Laos and Cambodia. More than half of our population is involved in directly or indirectly in agriculture. All of our food are grown on soil, and no one seems to be excited about soil when I share these investments. With many years of extractive farming, our soils are degrading and our food security is at risk. And the livelihood of our smallholder farmers is at risk. In Vietnam alone, there's more than 10 million smallholder farmers who rely heavily on the land. So having the land, healthy and thriving is very important economically, not just impact. When you're growing, you want it to be efficient and productive. And if we focus on putting the patient capital in to restore the land and make it healthier, it's going to bring the economic return. When I talk to investors, people are always looking at the end result. How are we going to scale up this business? How many more tons are we going to sell? How many carbon credits are you going to get? But if you don't take care of the health of the fundamental, which is our soil and our forest, we're not going to get there. So to get your financial return, we need to do this first. Yeah.
That's so important. I think a repeat of that is that you can talk about all the returns possible, but if the basic is not healthy, none of the others will take place. Would you like to add in terms of why, from your side, this is popping up more and why you're doing it specifically?
I think both Chris and Ellen have explained this quite well. So maybe what I'm going to share in terms of how are we seeing the nature-based solutions and what is the blended finance angle there, right? Currently, just to give you a bit of a perspective, the global blended finance market is somewhere around $213, $214 billion, out of which around $24 billion is ASEAN. And nature-based solutions in Asia is just $2 billion. Okay, so you can see already that it's majorly underrepresented. You have most of the blended finance going towards infrastructure, clean energy, financial services, more focusing on financial inclusion, MSME financing, etc. And what we've started seeing is that once again, I mean, this is more specifically to ASEAN as well, that given such agri-oriented economies, but also such rich biodiversity within different countries as well, forests, etc., there is tremendous opportunity to use blending of capital in different ways and also encash on the developing trends around carbon credits as well, as we see over a period of time. And I mean, we have New Forest here sitting as well, and they've put up a wonderful fund, and so is Mekong doing some excellent work in that space as well. So I think those are some very exciting opportunities which now even mainstream private sector capital is thinking about. And purely thinking from an investor lens as well, right? Now, increasingly, the investors, be it institutional investors, high net worth individuals, etc., they are increasingly pushing the asset managers, or the asset owners are pushing the asset managers, saying that how is this achieving sustainability targets? And I think as that transition happens to the younger people, I think that's a question which is getting relevant and more prevalent in all the discussions than what it used to happen before. So I think the good thing is that this is a growing asset class and more opportunities, as you know, as Mekong Capital and others who are launching this and proving these models out, more folks to kind of take this mantle to the next level.
Thank you so much, Ritesh. I have one more question, and we will open it up shortly to the audience. So hold on to your question or frame it in your mind, because I'll ask you to ask the panelists some questions. We'll have time for that. One of the things from each of your perspectives, funding or receiving or giving, what's the challenges you're experiencing specifically in Vietnam with regards to it? Chris, from your point, from WWF on nature-based solutions, what are the challenges of receiving funding or even getting that information out? Ellen, yourself, the blended finance, what are the challenges and opportunities? Because the conference is about an investor lens. You're both on both sides or collaborating in different ways. What is the challenges that you see? And I would like to add that there is a lot of money coming in towards climate into Vietnam. How are you going to receive it, or how are even these communities going to see it and be able to deliver on impact? Three different questions, all packaged in one. I start with you, Chris. Which one do you choose?
So I think that the barriers to, let's just take it generally, the barriers to investing in nature-based solutions are very diverse. And I guess that's because nature-based solutions are very diverse. And if we think about restoring forest landscapes in central Vietnam, or restoring flood-based agriculture in the Mekong Delta, or looking at mangrove restoration, or seagrass beds, or mudflats, or any of these different opportunities. I mean, even, you mentioned the floods yesterday. I mean, where in the context of Ho Chi Minh City's planning regime could you incorporate wetlands that could absorb floodwater? So there's a whole range of challenges there related to the way in which decisions on how land is used are taken. And if we think about the Delta, with its complex array of dikes and water management, you can farm 100 hectares or 150 hectares or 200 hectares of flood-based rice relatively easily. You only have to involve a couple of wards or communes and 30 farming households. But if you want to do 1,000 hectares or 10,000 hectares or even 100,000 hectares, then you're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of smallholder farmers and many, many wards and communes and provinces and districts. So that's a huge challenge. And then you need to find a way to monetize the tangible benefits. So in this case, the rice that's made into products and sold, or the carbon that's captured, and to monetize the less tangible benefits. So the maintenance of soil height, the storage of floodwater, which benefits people in another place. So all of those things are quite complicated. And where there's a specific gap, which, some donors like the Government of Australia, which, funded the work that I showed just now, and the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank and USAID and others, some donors are putting money into this, but where there seems to be a real gap is investing in the full-scale design of what that kind of scale-up of nature-based solutions could really look like. What kind of financial structures and mechanisms and governance mechanisms and agreements with farmers to offtake the products, what does that all really look like when it's done at scale? You can do it over 100 or 200 or even 1,000 hectares, but how would you do that over 100,000 hectares? And that's the scale we need to have a bigger impact. So then if you're thinking about an investment fund or an investor who's thinking, well, I've got $100 million to invest in nature-based solutions, there's a big gap between $100 million over here, and about 40 or 50,000 smallholder farmers over here tied up in provincial and other land use decision making. So yes, it's those are the challenges.
Thank you. And Ellen, from your viewpoint, from your background and what you're about to do in the future, what are you seeing as a key barrier?
Yeah, like Chris said, there is a whole large range of barriers, and I'm sure the companies that raising in the audience have their own challenges, but I'm going to talk from my own experience there. I'm going to group them into two things. One is the challenge of capital. Now, you did say there is a lot of capital or climate, and yes, it's nice to have a lot of capital, but it's about spending that money, and how do we make that happen, and quicker. So in terms of capital, I empathize a lot with the people in the crowd who's fundraising, because I'm doing that myself, and especially the company, which have it even more difficult than me. For example, debt. There need to be concessional debt available. It's a shame that when they go and raise debt, a lot of the debt that even coming from impact funds have higher rates than what they can get from a local bank. The second one is not a lot of equity is available. A lot of the business model that I've been, nurturing this relationship for a year and a half, are still struggling with equity funding. There's a lot of debt available, but not. And when you're in the transition to regenerative agriculture, you need patient capital. You don't want to be worried about paying this interest every year. So that's very important in terms of capital. And the second bucket is process, the challenge in process. The process is just so long and difficult. And I say that about myself too. We just made an announcement yesterday that we invested in a biofertilizer, biochar company. It took a lot of work behind the scene, even though it just seems like just one day celebration, but it took months and months and months and lots of support from everybody to make it happen. And the thing about process is a lot of the time the decision makers are not here. They're not on the ground. They're disconnected from the work in reality, the actions that's been taken. So what I've done recently is I would take the investors there themselves, because only when you see and only when you witness, then you will believe. As investors, we have a healthy dose of skepticism, which is very good in investing. But until you go there and witness for yourself, you're always looking for the perfect deal. This deal that can scale, this deal that impact women, this deal that impacts smallholder farmers, this deal that have biodiversity. It's not about the perfect deal. It's about how do we build for that perfect deal together. So if we can have the processes, make it more shorter and make sense, because sometimes, for example, I'm also applying for grants. Convergence. And even in the grant process, it's just a lot of work. And for our, companies who are raising and getting $20,000, $50,000 grant, but then they have to do all this work, But grant is the money is just one piece. Networking is also another piece, and this is why they put in the effort. But we got to make value for money investment process as well.
Ritesh, would you like to add? I'm going to then ask the audience for one or two quick questions, because I feel the glare on me. No questions, okay? Then I will have you, Ritesh, answer. And then for those that had questions, grab the speakers right after. I'm sure they'll take the time to answer them. Please go ahead, Ritesh.
Right, thanks. I think very relevant point from both of them. Maybe I'm just going to focus on the opportunities here, just to give it a positive twist towards the end. I think what could be an interesting angle in nature-based solution is looking at what we call in our world of blended finance is more of hybrid deals. By hybrid, you mean you are not dividing the world between adaptation and mitigation, but trying to merge them in some form or shape, so that you kind of try to lead to its own path of sustainability. And we believe that that's a very good opportunity to demarcate this whole adaptation and mitigation dialogue globally as well as in the region, and also maybe potentially in Vietnam as well. I mean, to give you an example, agroforestry is kind of an example of that, or what Mekong is trying to do, regenerative agriculture is an example of that, right? They are building in the adaptation angle into a strong mitigation project, which is very important. Um, when you're looking at nature-based solutions, please look at diversifying your revenue streams. What we see is a lot of nature-based solutions purely rely on carbon credits. Nothing against carbon credits. I'm sure it's a market which hopefully will do well, and it will emerge as an important important in the whole ecosystem. But if you purely rely your revenue stream on that, it's going to be difficult to find investors to put money just on the hope that someday your carbon credits will play out. Aggregation makes a lot of sense, especially if you're embarking on blended finance as a structure. Look at aggregated formats, funds, once again, something similar to what Mekong is doing or New Forest sitting there. They've put large funds together, targeting 200, 250 million, aggregating some of these together. So when you go through this very intensive process of 1.5 year to get everything done, it's worth the while. It's worth all the resources that you kind of put in, even if you are a concessional capital provider or a commercial capital provider, doesn't matter. Very important, do stakeholder engagement early. You have to match the ground reality and what the potential investor is looking for as well. So some of that work, if it is done earlier, you can build it in your whole model, which you are trying to bring it together. We do see in many countries role of philanthropic capital as well to be an important one in nature-based solutions, because there is a strong community angle there, and that's an angle which normally resonates with giving. So I'm unsure about in different countries the lay of the land is different, but that could be one potential. And the last and the only part is now that also a government also has to do a bit from their side, from a policy making standpoint. You have to clarify, exactly define what is NBS, and I think Vietnam is already coming up with green taxonomies. Hopefully later this year is what I understood from one of the panels today. So which is great. And that really then makes it easier for different actors to converge, build transparency, disclosure, but also look at interoperability if you want foreign funds to come your way. So that's it.
Thank you so much for that. So I have one last question. I will wrap up, I promise. Actually, so we have this audience, and they're all here for different reasons and for each one of you. And they come from different backgrounds and sectors, etc. And our theme of this session is accelerating nature-based solutions in the Mekong Delta. What would be the final sentence, and only one sentence, because I'll get into trouble, only one sentence for the audience here when they leave on three components here. It's the accelerating, the nature-based solutions, and the Mekong Delta. From each of your viewpoints and sector and approach, what would be the one sentence? So Ritesh, I will go that way around. And if you have one sentence that, if there's one thing they should remember from this session, from your viewpoint, what's the one sentence?
For NBS, I think for me, it's hybrid is the key. So I'm not going to go. I've already explained what that means. So I'll let Ellen but hybrid is the key for
Hybrid
NBS.
is the key.
We should talk after this, but not just talk and take actions, because that's where the real things happen. So
take action.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ellen. Chris?
Maybe a focus on the products that are coming from these nature-based solutions, in this case, flood-based agriculture. If there's a market for those noodles that I showed you, and that market takes off, then we will see widespread adoption of that nature-based solution. And so that's if you can do that for your different nature-based solutions, that the market will drive it. So what's the investment we need to make that will build that market?
So key, all three of you. A big, big thank you. And let's do a big round of applause to all three speakers. Thank you so much.